Well, hello, one and all. How you guys doing out there?
Doing good, Tony. Good to see you.
Okay,
Doing
let me
great,
make
Tony.
good to see you now. Let me make a quick announcement for everybody out there. So, Nico, our schedules were kind of chaotic this week. So, Nico could not make it today. So, we have substitute host. I feel like, I'm Ed McMahon on the Tonight Show. We have Brian Deneve again, who's going to be apparently our go-to guy when one of us can't make it, and none finer than to have Brian. So, welcome back. Today, Brian is going to be actually a co-host. So this is cool. Um, yeah. So I hope everybody had a good week.
It was mixed for me, man. So we got Monday off, so it was a short work week, which was always a bonus. But I was on call, so I got woken up quite a few times. Had kind of real erratic sleep, so I'm glad to be off and among the living again.
Yeah,
Are
I
you
was
on?
kind of in the same boat. I had a Monday off work. My daughter was off school, but she actually went back to an in-person situation here in Wisconsin. So that was just fine, but it's obviously an adjustment being virtual for a while with her, and she's been back at it. And it's been a decent week. I don't know. A little Chicago flavor here in Wisconsin. I had Lou Malnati's last night for dinner. They opened
Uh,
one of those up here about a year ago. So good
you
stuff.
know, I was a late convert to Lou Malnati's, and I have to say they are fantastic. They're great. Um, Sadly, there's not one near. But I'm in a what do they call that? A
Dead
food
zone.
desert, yeah, or
Yeah,
food.
right.
Those
Food
are
Right.
desert.
atheism. Yeah, food desert. There's nothing out here. Um, and I miss good pizza. The closest good pizza is Nancy's, but it's a carry out and only. And I think they're frozen, and they just add the toppings to it because I get stuffed pizza, and it's a good
Sure.
45. Yeah, it's a good 45 minutes to
Wow.
make it. Yeah, anywhere. It's just the way it is. And I ordered one. This is going back about 2 years ago from the Nancy's in Island Lake, and they told me it'll be done in 20 minutes. So right away, my red flag went up because it's like, this isn't Cousin Vinny, where you can make grits, in a couple minutes here. It takes a long time to make a stuffed pizza. So, but
Your cousin Vinny makes grits? I don't know what that is, Tony.
okay, there's the movie Cousin Vinny,
Oh, my
right?
cousin Vinny.
My
Yeah.
cousin Vinny, right? So cousin Vinny was interviewing the one witness who claimed that the boys were in and out in a couple minutes from robbing the store, where he also had testified that he was cooking grits, and they went in when he started his grits, and they went out when he was done with his grits, and you know
Okay.
it
Okay.
wasn't possible. So
Well, any excuse to watch a Marissa Tomei movie, I think I need to revisit that one.
and she won the Oscar for that. My goodness. Oh, okay, good. I'm glad we brought that up because, first of all, I love Marissa Tomei. Absolutely. So now this is a little kind of long winded, but there's an interesting twist to this story that I'm about to tell you. So everybody knows I'm the world's greatest insomniac. I get up at like 2, 3 o'clock. So yesterday I'm up early and I don't normally watch television, but I was bored. So during the course of the early morning, I put the TV on and a Beverly Hillbillies episode comes on, right? So I'm not really paying much attention until the very end. And I see this woman dancing with Jethro, okay, in their mansion. And I mean, I'm talking, I get the very end of this, like 1 minute left in the show.
Mhm.
And apparently this woman was a gold digger after, Jed Clampett's money. Well, I was taken aback by this woman. Okay. First, the way she moved and her physical beauty. And I'm going to get to that in a split second. Anyway, I waited till the end credits to see what her name was because I'm pretty good with those old time actors and actresses, but I didn't know this woman. So I catch her name and I go to do a Google search to find out anything about her. And frankly, she's still alive. She's going to be 91 or 90 in April. Her name is Sylvia Lewis, and she was a very famous dancer, choreographer, and so on. And I'm here to say now, without question, she is the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, ever, anywhere, ever. And I used to hold that for Julie Newmar. But this woman, it was
I'm writing this
breathtaking.
down as you're saying this, so I
Yes,
can, you know.
Sylvia Lewis.
Oh, we record this.
Now, here's where it gets okay. The story should end there, but it doesn't. So, I was just curious, what does she look like now? Well, I found no photos. However, I found her website. She has a website. So I went to her website, and while it looks like a modern website, has a lot of historical pictures of her. One of the non-modern things was it started to play background music, which that used to be the big thing in the 90s, but people really don't do that much anymore.
Oh yeah, the GeoCities, and you had like your
Yeah.
theme song, sure.
Right. But this was not a, GeoCities or, it was a regular, nice website, but just so the song was Sentimental Journey, which is an old standard. Les Brown wrote the song, World War II era, but it was a modern jazz arrangement. Very good. I could not find who recorded it. I have no clue, no idea. With very modern jazz chords. So what I did was I got my Audacity software and I went back to her website and I attempted to record it, which I did. And I proceeded to, I mean, it really blew me away. I proceeded to play it back and it sounded good. I got my accordion out and I wanted to learn the chords and add a little more jazz chords of my own. So I spent all day yesterday doing an arrangement of Sentimental Journey on the accordion with really good modern jazz chords. All because, I mean, it's weird because I watched a 1960s episode of Beverly Hillbillies and it just snowballed into that. So then the story should end, but it doesn't. So I kind of gotten like, I took a break. This was like 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. And I just said, I'm going to go back to her website and look at the rest of it. Well, there was some video clips, actual video clips of her, and there was one of her singing and dancing on the Dick Van Dyke Show to a song called Chelito Lindo, which is a very famous Mexican song. And we all had to play that on the accordion or whatever. But anyhow, she did this unbelievable like jazz arrangement on the Dick Van Dyke Show, and she danced, and it was just mind blowing. So
was it just her dancing, or was it like a
Yes.
troupe of women? Okay.
Just her. You have to check it out. And I ended up putting the accordion back on and trying to write the chords and work out a jazz arrangement of Chelito Lindo. And then I stumbled upon a couple of very good jazz arrangements. One in particular by some Mexican group. I don't recall their name. Young. They were very, very young people. Early 20s, it looked like. Recent. They did this like a couple years ago. So yeah, yesterday I spent time playing, practicing jazz. It's a shame that I'm so out of shape, but the good news is I was hearing these chords, which because of what my hearing loss, it's hard for me to pick up stuff, but I was able to realize, okay, these are substitute chords. He's doing this, that, whatever. And, yeah, I just wish my technical abilities were back up. I wish I could play, but
When was the
So
last time
that's-
you touched a accordion?
it's been a while. I picked it up once. Somebody was over and I just tried to play a couple tunes. And I mean, I was so out of shape. But the last time I really tried to practice has been, well, not since I lived out here. It's been years. It's been many years, probably over 10 years.
Here's a digression. Do you think practicing music is good, like for long-term mental health? So like as you get older, is it something that you encourage people just besides entertainment value, that there's actually some cognitive advantages to playing?
Well, dealing with my mother's Alzheimer's, those people do claim that. Like I saw a video clip of the legendary Glenn Campbell, one of the greatest guitarists that ever lived, and he was still able to play until the very, very, very end. The one thing that he didn't lose was his ability to play. So yeah, there is some studies that are indicative of that. But for me, right now, even though I have those, the memory thing with me, but it's the frustration of not being able to play at a level that I know how to play. And that's frustrating because if I was just a simple player to playing, 2 and 3 note chords, no problem, but I'm not like that. I play 4 note, 5 block part blocks, open harmony, gigantic wide stretches, and very complicated. And it's hard to do. I don't remember a lot of chords and stuff. I hear things, but I got to figure it out. So that's unfortunate. But I do believe, yes, any talent you have, it could be writing, it could be painting, but there's something about music, isn't there? There really is. It's been in every culture, and there's a reason for that.
So Tony, did you think of Marissa Tomei as you were trying to work through these chords? I'm just wondering the connection here. If there's
No, Marissa
It was just hot
Tomei.
babes, I think.
No,
or
I was
something.
thinking nothing but this Sylvia Lewis, and and I'm like, yeah, but 90 years old is kind of a stretch. That's where Marissa Tomei comes in because she's around my age, and we're both Italian, and
she's still holding up. I mean, she's in the new Marvel movies and
Oh, really?
man, never missed a beat. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Well-
definitely the best Aunt May out there by a long shot.
Oh yeah. I mean, most of the Aunt May actresses were like in their 90s, and they picked Marissa Tomei to be. This is Peter Parker, the Spider-Man's alter ego's aunt, basically, Tony. So
I didn't know that. I don't follow that, but I did watch her when she did when she played Edith Bunker last year, when they did a remake or whatever, a one-shot episode of All in the Family, which I wish they would never have done because Woody Harrelson was playing Archie Bunker and he was literally unbelievably horrible. I've never seen an acting performance that bad. So, but she was over the top. She was flighty, trying to be, Edith Bunker.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
sure.
she's awesome, and
Yeah.
um,
So, because I'm sure she's tuning in, or some of her people
Aren't
or
they all?
handlers. That being said, as far as you're right. Julie Newmar, great.
all the
I don't
best.
know her name. She was kind of B level, but the one that was in the Planet of the Apes. You know
Oh,
what I'm
I know
talking
her
about.
name exactly. Linda Harrison. She was
Yeah.
on the list.
She was.
Yeah.
She was rocking.
That
She
cave
Breathtaking.
woman
was
outfit.
rocking. Oh my gosh, pair of hips on her. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Charlton Heston's interest in that movie. Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
that was perfect because, not to sound toxically masculine, but she couldn't talk. So that was like probably, a good thing probably for their relationship, I'd say in the long term. But there's
Didn't
anybody
she
to be
end
the
up-
last.
Wasn't she able to say his name at the end of the movie or something?
I think so. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. That's where they went with it. So
Charlton Heston has a Chicago tie. He was a graduate of Northwestern University.
did not know that.
Yeah, and I believe he was born in, Winnetka or Waukegan. I always get those two mixed up. I know that Jack Benny's from Waukegan,
Okay.
who would have been a man that I really would have wished that I could have met. By all accounts, this cheap tightwad was just an act. He was supposed to be one of the nicest men, and he's fun. He was funny. I remember as a kid when he died. I mean, I didn't know much about him. I was like 9 or something, but 8 or 9. But my grandparents were like, "Oh wow, bad day." Jack Benny's dead. And on that note, we've lost quite a few people just in the last couple 3 days here. Well, let's just Hank Aaron, Hammer and Hank.
Yeah, big
And-
thing in Milwaukee here. Obviously massive presence from the time in his Braves and his legendary hitting there, and unfortunate, kind of shook this area for sure.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure the same is happening in Atlanta, because that's where he finished his career out, and then Larry King passed away. But another name that many of you may not even think of, but it bothered me, was Gregory Sierra, who was an actor who should have made it bigger than he did. He was a Puerto Rican actor from Spanish Harlem, New York, who got his start. Well, I guess his first break. I mean, I don't know what he did, if he did theater, but was the next door neighbor, Julio on Sanford and Son, and went on to be on Barney Miller, and even did a very legendary episode of All in the Family as well. So he passed away. Apparently, he was 83 years old, and that's a shame. So yeah, this past few days, boom, boom, boom. They said it comes in threes, but
Although I think technically Larry King was dead for several years. They just finally decided to call it, I think.
yeah, enjoy your time. Well, you don't believe in heaven or hell anyway, so that's okay for you, Joe. But yeah, just once, can you respect like anybody, like not
Something,
just
yeah.
something, anything, right?
Sorry to offend the Larry King fans of the Snap No Tap podcast. Hey, since we brought up baseball, talking about we lost a legend. Who are this was one of the things that when I saw his passing, like who would you rank as the top 5 baseball players of all time?
Babe Ruth, number 1, period. End of story. That's it. Stop. Don't even go any further. End the podcast. There is the other 2 names that get thrown around, and everybody's deserving, but Babe Ruth was basically, he won 91 games as a pitcher, just dominated. But the other 2 big names are Ty Cobb, you're going way back, and Willie Mays, who was a 5-tool player. But I'm very into baseball, as you know. And sorry, folks out there, but if you check up the stats, their peak, Mickey Mantle had a better peak than Willie Mays. Willie Mays had the longevity. He didn't have the injuries, and this and that. But yeah, for me, it's open and shut, Babe Ruth. And I'll take it a step further. He's the greatest athlete of any team, at least in American history. I can't speak about other countries like with cricket or soccer or something, but I'm going with Babe Ruth all the way.
Wow, so you think he's the greatest athlete? So just
On a team sport, he dominated far more than anybody else did. Like, Michael Jordan did not, he wasn't
even like
that
Jim
much.
Brown.
Well, Jim Brown was the greatest running back to ever play the game. Okay. 8 out of 9 seasons, he led the league, not just, like his conference. He led the league in rushing, still holds the highest rushing average of all time, 5.2 yards per carry. And he walked away at the top of his game. The only thing that he actually admitted that he was sorry about was that he didn't tackle as much as he wanted to, but he never missed a game. He was, sturdy, and he's also in the lacrosse Hall of Fame. So now we're talking about athletic ability. I just mean with Babe Ruth, his talent on a team sport way exceeded anybody else. Now, for Jim
So Tony,
Brown,
question on that then. If I recall, his raw talent was obviously he worked toward it too, but wasn't he enjoying the ladies and the nightlife? Babe Ruth, I'm talking about, but he could still obviously crank it.
yeah,
I think his partying was legendary. There's probably some serious raw talent to be that dominant.
Clearly,
Well,
you like to eat
that.
too.
well, they claim now all of this is, that he would drink during the games now and then he would eat hot dogs. One thing that they did do, now this is where I have my evidence when people talk about, it's a different era. He wouldn't be able to, hit a slider and this and that. That's nonsense. That would just be a matter of adjustment. But they did some scientific tests on him, on Babe Ruth. They did a battery of, I don't know how many, 7, 8, hand-eye coordination, things along those lines. And many years later, actually about 10, 12 years ago, that recently, when Albert Pujols, who was at that point the hottest player in baseball, he's a Hall of Famer, he'll be in a Hall of Fame. They put Pujols through the same exact tests, and he did not fare as well as Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth beat him in every one of those tests. So that shows you that, yes, Brian, Babe Ruth had some sort of natural gift, and he swung a very heavy bat. That would probably be his one concession. He wouldn't be swinging as a heavy bat nowadays. But the other thing is he was hitting gargantuan home runs. The ballparks now are like bandboxes. He'd be feasting.
So raised mounds and things like that, you don't think is a factor necessarily when it comes to the bat?
Well, sure it is, but he would overcome that. They raised the mound, or no, they lowered the mound to make it easier for the pitchers, or to make it easier for the hitters. Back in the late 60s, I don't remember. It was after the 67 or 68 season. Bob Gibson, who we just recently lost, he had such a dominant season that, yeah, they ended up lowering the mound um, because he was just, I mean, it was just getting to be lopsided. Um, and an expansion really hurt too, Brian, because now you have players that, you know, and yes, I realize that we're getting players from other countries that didn't exist in Babe Ruth's time. But you got players making the bigs that probably wouldn't have made it before because of expansion, and now you have no more slots.
Well, on that note, any modern guys in that top five for you? Being the last
Okay,
20 years, I mean.
well, well, Trout's going to be in there. I mean, Mike Trout is phenomenal. He's a 5 tool player. Uh, Let me just add that uh, Ted Williams never seems to be in the discussion of greatest players. He's in the discussion of greatest hitters. Okay, 344 lifetime batting average, 520 some odd, 523, I believe, home runs. Lost 5 seasons to 2 wars. I mean, that right there, wow. But I would say Trout, okay, the elephant in the room, Barry Bonds. But, he look what happened. We don't need to go there, but
I will say this about Bonds. So I went to I think it was it was a home game at Giants with Milwaukee hosting them, and this was in about 06, 07, when obviously Bonds was on track, or at least attempting, to break Hank Aaron's record. And definitely the boos to Barry Bonds was probably the loudest thing in Miller Park that day. And Milwaukee fans are actually pretty gentlemanly, very, very probably Midwestern nice, but yeah, they weren't a big fan of Barry Bonds when he came to town.
yeah, well, it's. I mean, I hate dropping names because you always forget. Miguel Cabrera is great, not top 5 all time. This is just my opinion, but and I can't even say that Mike Trout will be top 5, but he'll be top 10. You don't know. The guy could get injured. Uh, but yeah, Bonds. Well, we had to live with it here with Sosa,
Mhm.
and he was as dirty as they came with that stuff. All of a sudden he's as big as a house and he's getting all these things happening. Really changed baseball. McGuire and a lot of, I mean, pretty much a lot of people. But yeah, getting back to the original question, to me it was Babe Ruth, and I was going to say the comparison between Jim Brown. Imagine if Jim Brown was also a quarterback. Okay, then we could have a little discussion. But Babe Ruth pitched and was great, okay, and but his hitting was so extraordinary, and he had a great batting average, 342 lifetime batting average. Uh, it's just it's hard to slugging. Well, the newer statistic, WAR, WAR. He leads in so many categories to this day. Uh,
I have a controversial point on that, and you'll probably, but I mean, the one thing you can maybe ding Ruth against, and it might have chipped away at his statistics a little bit, is I mean, it was a segregated uh, system at that point. So was he playing against all the best at that time?
Well, all you have to worry about is was he facing the best pitching? Okay, because who was ever in left field or who's playing first wouldn't have mattered. Uh, he barnstormed, and he barnstormed through the Negro leagues, and he barnstormed in Japan, and he dominated every uh, league that he competed in. He was, you know, head and shoulders. Um, so all when that subject's been brought up many times, but yes, it's all about facing pitching. A pitcher's the only one that's going to stop him. He wasn't one of these guys that would, lay down a drag bunt and beat it out. So now you can say, well, you had a better infielder. No, it's speculation, Joe. It's something that you'll never know because you can't turn back the hands of time. But there were some great players back then. But here's what people need to realize: pro football really just started in 1920. Okay. There was no hockey, I don't believe. There was no Major League Soccer. There was really boxing. I mean, as far as making it competitive sports, boxing and baseball. Okay. Wrestling was fake back then. So, wrestling tended to get a lot of the washouts from football or something, college football players or what have you, and maybe amateur wrestlers that, some of them that wanted to do something. But so baseball really attracted a lot of great athletes. Um, you know, and Jim Thorpe played both baseball and football, but that's something that we can't answer how he would do in a segregated league for sure. But I do know that he did barnstorm, as did many other players. Lou Gehrig was another one, and that's another great, great player and a great man, Lou Gehrig.
And you touched on something, maybe we should close this out and move on, but the idea of talent attraction, like I played rugby in college and there was always, the best guys were coming from the English colonies, like the New Zealand, Australia, parts of Europe. And it was like, we've got America, this massive, this great talent base. Why don't we have great rugby, right? Because they're going to play football. They're going to do other things, obviously money making sports. So there is some level of self-selection. And I think that being a factor into how great a sport is or how great the athletes are within that sport is because of where they choose to, to place themselves or which road they went down.
Very true. And then you have to take it a step further as well and look at the school systems. Do the schools even offer certain sports, in high
Mhm.
school or before high school, so, I'm out of the loop with all of that. But, in my day and age, or at least where I was from, you were very limited. Now, my grade school, when I went to seventh and eighth grade, I had to transfer because my original grade school closed for lack of enrollment. I went to school with a lot of Slovenians and Croatians and Serbs. And these were kids who were born there or their parents were born there for sure. But most of the kids were born there. And so they played soccer, or they called it football. And once in a blue, they would play it in the parking lot at recess, and then maybe once or twice in gym class. I wasn't gifted. I liked floor hockey, but I wasn't very good at at soccer. So I can't say that I actually played it. But you're right, man.
Yeah, there's so much of that. I mean, certain states, even with, Texas football, obviously hockey anywhere north of, well, Minnesota, Wisconsin, where I am, obviously
Yeah.
it's, culturally there, and that's a huge thing. And wrestling, of course, being big in certain parts of the country, certain states, practically non-existent in others. And that might be a good way to talk a little bit about, some subjects when it comes to wrestling and amateur, folk style, freestyle, or Greco, and that being, a sister to catch as catch can, and kind of a in many of their techniques, a foundation of what we're trying to learn here. So if you guys are ready, wouldn't mind kind of delving
Yeah.
into that.
Well, it used to be, well, so William Muldoon, they like to call him the father of American wrestling or something. He was like the very first New York State athletic commissioner, and he was a Greco guy. But I don't like, I mean, he may have been popular in this and that, but I don't like to give any one person that kind of credit in particular. I mean, yes, he was the first New York State athletic commissioner or what have you, but wrestling predated him. They claimed that, even Abe Lincoln was a wrestler and people before that. You know, as time goes on, wrestling changed. A lot of the serious holds that maybe not all the holds that we do, but some of them have been taken out through the years. And it's become very sanitized for injury purposes. Uh, but yet, from all that I know and all the old timers that are long gone now that I talk to that had a heartbeat on wrestling, um, very, very few were anything good at submissions. It just wasn't something that I mean, they learned what they needed to know, just stuff. But wrestling, catch wrestling here in America influenced a lot of other styles, judo, jujitsu, Sambo, uh, many of the great professional wrestlers out of America, the world champions, they were here. You know, we're talking, you know, Ed Lewis, Joe Stecker, Frank Gotch, of course. And you had Hackenschmidt. But there's stuff about him. I don't want to get into that today, but you know, Earl Caddick, John Pesic, Ray Steele, who was a national champ. You know,
Joe Stecker. Did you mention him?
yes, Joe Stecker. Yeah,
Okay.
the Scissor King. I think I mentioned him, but yeah, he was another phenomenal. I think I talked to him about him not too long ago. And Luthez told me he got to see him when he was in a sanitarium, and I guess they wrestled, and he said he was a monster even then. You know, but you know, Wisconsin. You know, Ed Strangle Lewis is from, I believe, Neenah, Wisconsin, or something like that. You know, and then you had other guys, George Bothner, who was a lightweight, who was fantastic, had a gym out of New York City. That's a name that people don't seem to talk about. Uh, and then you have others, some that we'll probably never know. Their names are gone from history because they were never promoted as serious wrestlers, you know, or they were like George Bothner, just too small back then to, you know, really be marketable, I guess you'd say. Um, and Henry Gehring, who helped coach my coach, who's actually in one of Frank Gotch's books from back in the early 1900s. He was a Cleveland guy. And talk about Cleveland or the suburbs, you got to go with Tom Jenkins, one-eyed man, you know.
Oh, he was from Ohio. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he was from a suburb of Cleveland. Yeah, a Cleveland boy, we call him. But, you know, and he ended
Made
up having
famous by neck conditioning and trying to hang himself, right? Is that right?
that's Farmer Burns.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
but okay. Rewind. Thank
But,
you.
Well, Jenkins lost his title, crown, whatever, you're going to believe it, to Frank Gotch. But here's the deal. Years later, after his pro career was done, he ended up coaching at West Point. That is Tom Jenkins. Was a wrestling coach at West Point for many years. And Jenkins, you know, was a hard man. He was a tough, hard wrestler. Uh, so, and again, I hate, you know, bringing up names because you forget people. You know, I mean, George Tragos, who was a national champion here as well. Ad Santel, Adolf Ernst was his real name. You know, others. They just the list can go on and on. So I
So
apologize.
one guy, Tony, Nat Pendleton. I mean, he was highly ranked, accomplished in amateur wrestling. I mean, what do you think his catch wrestling ability would have been at?
Well, he tried it, and apparently, if you believe the thing, he wrestled John. He was a silver medalist in the Olympics. So let's just get that straight. And he ended up wrestling John Pesic, and allegedly Pesic hooked him. I don't know if that story's true or not true. Okay. Yes, he did dabble in professional wrestling, that is Nat Pendleton, before he embarked on a acting career. But I think he would be quite good. He could hold his own. He was strong. He was in shape. But again, I know a lot of people want to believe things, but you were living in an era where things were hyped and things weren't, you know, necessarily what they presented themselves to be. So,
And you
yeah.
bring up a good point. If I could jump in because I had a conversation. I knew Mike Chapman obviously and had conversations with him a few times over the years. He's a, you know, wrestling historian, wrote a lot of books. And one thing he talked about was people would come at him with attributing newspaper articles, essentially challenging him on some of what he stated with regard to his research and history on wrestling. And, you know, it could have been something as simple as a mention in a news clipping on a specific pro match or whatever. And at the time I was also a journalist, I was a reporter. And, you know, we just talked about how flawed that approach is really, because, you know, I'm churning out stories on the daily and trying to be accurate, but there's all these other factors. So you're telling me that somebody who's spent a lot of time focusing on a topic or a subject can be basically blown out because somebody is referencing a news clipping from, how many decades ago on a specific paragraph, and they've chosen to extrapolate off that. So it kind of speaks to just this larger, I guess, this larger thing of people will believe what they want, number one. And number two, you also have to look at like those other factors, Tony, like you're saying, like some people were hyped over others, does that mean they were the best there? And we've all been in and out of gyms, and there's plenty of guys that you've never heard of that pretty tough guys, you know what I mean, would probably beat some of the bigger names out there. But, for whatever reason, they're just more of a hobbyists or jobbers, and they're not quite the, the big names that everybody knows.
Well, that's very true. And now I'm going to get back on this subject, but I'm going to take off on what you just said. So when Kevin King, my best buddy, and everybody knows Kevin, when he got killed in the plane crash, the Tribune, I believe it was, sent a reporter, and one of Kevin's neighbors claimed that he was a jet fighter pilot in Vietnam, which was total bullshit. Kevin was never in the service. I know Kevin better than anybody, and we used to talk about this all the time. Kevin wanted to fly for the Marines, but it just never panned out. He was in school and die school, and he got an exemption, so he never was a military guy. So George, that owned the building, our landlord, George was pretty upset, and he contacted the Tribune to say this is not true. He was never in the service. He certainly wasn't a jet pilot. He never even flew a jet. And they just blew it off. They weren't about to retract it because Kevin was just basically a nobody. All right.
Sure.
So it hits home that, yeah, people can say anything. Let's continue on that, because this is an Ed Strangler Lewis Chicago story to show you how ridiculous some of these things are and the gullibility of people. So Ed Strangler Lewis was involved in a quote unquote car accident. Okay. The day that he was supposed to have a match. So long story short, the guy gets out of the car. Ed Lewis gets out of the car. This is just an ordinary citizen. Ed Lewis is the world's heavyweight champion wrestler. This is important. Those two get into a tussle. So apparently Ed Lewis puts him in his famed side headlock and, holds him until the police come. Mm-hmm. So you would think that would be the end of the story. No, it isn't. Ed Lewis challenges the man to come down to, I think he was wrestling at the amphitheater or wherever he was in Chicago, make an appearance tonight, and we'll settle this fight once and for all, blah, blah, blah. For anyone to believe that this is the way it went, that it was just a random guy off the street, you have rocks in your head. Okay. It just doesn't work that way in the real world. It was a work. The whole thing was a setup just to draw attention and to get fans, to get butts in the seat. That's what this was all about, and it boggles my mind now that somebody, maybe, I don't know how long ago that was, almost 100 years ago, was in the 20s. So, maybe reading this, if they stumble upon it, and, oh my goodness, wow, look at what happened back then, road rage. No, it was all, it was a lot of that went on.
I mean, you could frame it anyway on that. You could say that just shows that Ed Lewis wasn't that great. Some guy off the street who could barely beat him in the ring. You see what I mean? It's all about how it's, you essentially have your own conclusion and that you've already created for yourself. And then you find a way to get there. And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing in politics. We're seeing it in a lot of places right now. It's getting a little off beat. But
oh, well, you just create your own reality. That's how people are living. But, I try to tell folks, it's okay for a hobby to look back on this stuff, but look back at it with, a little bit of romance. Okay. Don't take everything for gospel, because whether Ed Lewis was the toughest guy in the world in the 1920s or not doesn't affect me. Doesn't affect you. Doesn't affect anybody alive today. And, that's all there is. That's all there is to it. Same with the Babe Ruth thing. It's fun to talk about Babe Ruth and all of this, but I'll just state my opinion. I'm certainly not going to get into an argument over it. But the beautiful thing about something like baseball is there are statistics. There are stats that are like 99.99% accurate. Okay. You have that to go on. You do not have that in professional wrestling. You never did. You never will. And even to an extent in boxing, especially back then, a lot of fixed fights, a lot of dives, you know, and what are you going to believe?
Well, Tony,
So
I think that even if it were like legitimate, like everything was, there were no work matches. I mean, the amount of variables in two people going head to head, you can't necessarily quantify that like you could when someone steps up to bat within this actual physical box with somebody who's X number of distance away as a pitcher. I mean, those are set parameters that you can go apples to apples comparison. I mean, as I think Luthez said it to you, and when there's compliance on one hold, meaning one particular match, one particular event within that match, that's a work match, because that can change the entire outcome of how things go because of that one variable of somebody not going 100% or giving in a certain way, in a predetermined outcome.
absolutely, you're 100% right. And also bear in mind that these athletes were never, generally speaking, were never peaked. Okay, especially back then when they were traveling on the road night after night. They're doing a show, 4 or 5 shows a night, maybe, or I mean, a week, or what have you. Okay, yeah, you should stay somewhat fit, but you're not like peaked because you need to rest. Um, if you went to another town, you may not even know who the hell you're matching up against, right? Some worker. So you would never know. You would never really have a chance to actually prepare. Whereas when you look at boxers, generally, I mean, you had some that had over 200 fights, pro fights, but they were a little bit more sporadic uh, when they fought. It wasn't like they weren't fighting professionally 5 times a week, unless you were a jobber, a club fighter, and you had some hard times and you were just doing it, you were a professional opponent. So I was a witness to I don't want to say a worked boxing match, but where the guy took a dive and the referee had to disqualify him, and that was Ernie Shavers when he fought. Ernie did not take the dive. Ernie Shavers fought somebody at the Richfield Coliseum. I went to see him, and I guess it was a substitute. And this guy was just scared to death to fight Ernie Shavers. And just kept going down just for you can look it up, um, and you'll probably get the boxer's name. But yeah, it was ugly. Uh, but to not get sidetracked on how that was an obvious dump. I mean, the guy wasn't even like he had no chance to beat Ernie Shavers. He was just afraid. Um, but getting back to the pro wrestling thing of it, you know, wrestling it was a way, it was entertainment first and foremost. And I try to tell folks, especially younger people, you have to put yourself in a little time capsule and go back to when there was no radio, even. Radio didn't exist. There was no television. And if there was films, which there really even wasn't that too much, they were all silent pictures, right? So when the wrestling troupe came to the local club or the auditorium or wherever they were holding it, beer hall or where have you, this was like big for these people. They wanted to be entertained. Hey, this is our entertainment. So it would do no good for a guy like with my skill level to go up against somebody who doesn't have any ability at all, or not good, and I take them out in 60 seconds or less. You know, people aren't going to like that. They're like, hey, wait a minute. We waited for this. Blah blah blah. So it was all about entertainment, and people just tend to lose track of that. But it was a business for these guys. Okay, it was a business of making money, and you have to get people in the seats, and you want to keep them coming in the seats. Okay, and you're not going to do that if it's lopsided. Now the Gotch Hackenschmidt thing was held here at Old Comiskey Park baseball stadium, and that drew a big crowd. I think it was a sellout, and they wrestled for like what, 2 hours. Now you figure there's a lot of scandal attached to those matches. But, and I wasn't there, but, wrestling did well back then. I mean, it was packing the house. They knew what they were doing as far as putting people in the seats. They knew how to entertain.
I think one of the things, Brian, you would kind of was what we're asking about when we were kind of prepping for the show was kind of amateur wrestling as kind of the foundation for catch wrestling, and what moves or things should you avoid? Because obviously not everything translates over, especially if we're going to play for real.
I don't agree with that, first and foremost. I don't agree with the blanket statement that amateur wrestling should be the base. Uh, Catch wrestling should be the base if you're going to be a catch wrestler, okay? Because amateur wrestling creates, I don't want, okay, it creates bad, let's say bad habits uh, uh, at times when it boils towards submission. The whole approach is different. You leave yourself vulnerable to a lot of things because you don't have to worry about it. Okay. You don't have to worry about getting choked. You don't have to worry about getting a leg lock or an arm bar or something like that to any extent in amateur wrestling. Okay. So your whole see, this is how I can tell when a person claims to be a catch wrestler or some submission wrestler. I can tell that they're either a jujitsu guy who's trying to make his own niche, or they had some amateur wrestling, but they didn't do catch because they don't approach things properly. Okay, it has to be blended in. It has to be seamless, and your whole route to get to something is going to be completely different. Okay, so if you're going to take, let's say you want to travel from Chicago to Cleveland, and you want to go by car, you're going to take a different way there than you would if you were going by airplane. Okay, forget about the time constraints. It's just you got a different path, a different route to get there, and that's how it is with these guys. Okay, uh, we tend to attract amateur wrestlers, so that's fine. But then I have to struggle many times to like unlearn certain things, like don't do it this way or don't do it that way, or when you get that hammer lock, you have to, your instinct is to not crank it too much because you'd be in trouble. Well, no, here you've got to do it completely differently. You got to twist, or you got to do this or that. Got to approach it completely differently. So it's very difficult. And then let's add into it people who studied this professional aspect of catch wrestling, these show holds that are maybe not as fanciful as some crazy sharpshooter move or whatever, but still are not applied properly. Then you gotta unlearn that. Uh, so yes, there are things though that you can take from amateur wrestling or vice versa, takedowns and so on. But you just have to watch out. There were legitimate amateur wrestlers back in the day that were getting snuffed by good shooters um, in gym shoots off of things like front face locks and stuff like that. But as years went by and different influences started to come into professional wrestling here in the States, different styles, let's say, of submissions, those submissions failed many times against quality wrestlers because they weren't put on properly. And a good amateur wrestler was able to just either power out or just, whatever. Classic was Antonio Inoki when he tried to shoot on Bruno Sammartino and it did not work out well. Okay. Bruno broke all the holds. I mean, he was just able to get out with no problem. Okay. Um,
So Tony, let me go deeper on that. So there's obviously a huge amount of data practitioners of the different styles of so-called amateur wrestling. So are there things that people can draw from in their approach to catch wrestling, or things they can possibly incorporate or at least learn from when you see two guys going for, in like a freestyle or folk style match or an instructional?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought it up. So now we can get into that. Okay. First and foremost, the biggest thing to take from wrestling, amateur wrestling, is the attributes, the approach to training, the not necessarily the strict cutting of the weight, but the intensity, the work, the respect between you and your coach. Okay, the listening to him, the coach trying to mold you and work on techniques that will work for you. And many takedowns, not all, but many takedowns or throws are appropriate. Okay, some are just not going to translate over too well. My thing is always look at your vulnerabilities. Okay, if you're thinking about making a crossover, look back and say, so many times when I did such and such a move, thank God the guy couldn't punch me in the face or knee me or bite me or rip me or something, right? Or, I would go belly down, parterre position or something like that. And in real life, you're going to get either armbarred or choked or, pounded, pounded out or something. These are things that you have to analyze. And there's no blanket statement, Brian, because everybody, that does amateur wrestling has they bring to me a different set of skills and what's the word I'm looking for? Experience.
And approaches,
And
different,
approaches, exactly.
techniques they use or strategies they use.
Correct. So it's, like pinning, pinning, it's okay to know, but if you're focusing on that, you've wasted a lot of time and effort because there's a difference between pinning and then in a hold down. Okay. And learning how to use your weight. And what I show, like on the lost art of hooking, when I put Bruce in a head and arm position, that's not a pin. Okay. I make sure that his shoulder's off the ground, his one that's closest to me, because I'm holding him there. I'm trying to crush him with that hold. Um, and so pinning, isn't a priority in a self-defense street fight situation. Holding down is, if you can get the guy. But again, how are you holding him down? Is he only held down because he's strictly sticking to amateur wrestling rules or judo or jujitsu rules? Or, can he punch you and do this or that and stick a finger in your eye or rip you somehow or another and able to get out? Those are the keys. So, yeah, you have to take everything as an approach. And for me, it was always learning to end the fight. Okay. And a submission doesn't necessarily have to be a technical hold. It could be a punch. It could be anything. It could be me saying something to you that scares you and you quit. Okay. It's all about bringing the end and learning how to chain things along. So when you're chaining, like we do a lot of, like when I'm training some of the guys in Chicago and they do their single legs, everybody that knows me knows one thing I complain about is it's taking you too long, okay, to finish these. Because in a street fight, you're going to get smashed around here, okay? Your single leg is not going to work because your head is there in that region where it could be struck for too long of a period of time. So imagine a boxer going up against a fighter with both of his arms locked and his face like wide open like this. Yeah, he's going to have some problems. And that's what happens. I have no problem, whizzing and, stabilizing the takedown, but then I still have a free arm. I can still do something, or I can hip heist or not hip heist, sprawl slightly, hip out, I should say, not sprawl, but clear the hips a little bit. And I still have my hands here to strike this guy. Okay. Or why should I go for a high crouch when I can instead just make it a very effective groin strike? Blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on and on. There's so many things that you take for granted in amateur wrestling because you're protected by the rules. And the same holds true for jujitsu or judo. You're protected by your rule set. But when in reality, in the real world, in the world that we trained in, you don't have those protections. And all of a sudden now your whole world's come tumbling down. So it's imperative, and I'm sorry for being long-winded, but it's very imperative that if you have a strong amateur background and you come to me for training, you have to be receptive for me to tell you, okay, that section of what you learned is very appropriate. This section will get you into some trouble, and let me tell you why. Let me show you how, and then go from there. So You're not just going to walk in. You're going to, there's going to be a lot of adaptation. So you have to have an open mind and you have to be very flexible and at times eat some humble pie to realize, oh, shoot, man, this isn't working out.
But generally, for people starting out who don't have access, because let's face it, there's not much catch wrestling elsewhere in the world or access to that training. If they're looking to get into it, it would be good at least to get training in amateur wrestling. Like, you know, if you're a kid starting out, definitely join your high school team, but keep in mind, you know, they should just in the back of their mind be thinking about exactly what you talked about. You know, should I be training this move or working on perfecting it if it actually is not going to translate into a street fight scenario? So
Correct. And then if you make the transition over to being a submission, jujitsu or judo submissions or whatever, you're not a catch wrestler. That doesn't make you a catch wrestler. The whole structure is totally different. I can't really articulate my point, but if you look at the approach of, let's just say, a traditional submission style, be it judo, jujitsu, sambo, whatever, their whole, it's a different approach than what I would use, and it's a different approach than what, let's say, an amateur wrestler would use, and so on, because there's different, it's all based on rule sets. It's just based on a rule set. A jujitsu guy can lay on his shoulders flat, for whatever, an extended period of time. Let's put it that way. Wrestler can't do that. Okay, so now if a wrestler is going to train with a jujitsu guy, let's say, and I'm just using jujitsu, it could be judo. Now they're going to be laying on their back. Well, that's not instinctive to you. And first of all, it's not really appropriate. As you know, you can do much better. But it's a whole different, okay, this is different now. So, and I've talked about this in the past too, about some people are trying to start catch tournaments with pins and submissions and blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't really, it's not a really great marriage there because, if you're trying to not get pinned, so you're not exposing your back to the mat, if you know with submissions, this fights should be over quickly. Okay. You can easily get an arm, a leg ride, a crossface, a choke, a Nelson, blah, blah, blah. As Brian and all you guys know, because you've seen me on the mat do it enough times. But I'm coming from a world where there was no sport. Catch wrestling was not a sport. It didn't exist. There was nothing. So I learned it in a completely different way. So if anybody's out there wanting to learn the pin and compete in these, modified tournaments, feel free to do it. Enjoy it. And I wish you all the best success. But again, it's a rule set that you're winning in. And I do want everybody to compete and do what they can and enjoy it. But, it's different than what we do.
yeah, and there are like, and if you are training for self-defense ultimately, and let's say you get into wrestling, it is, like I said, like to your point again, to be very mindful of your habits. At the Chicago Wrestling Club, that I've been to a few times, it always kind of, it was a shock me. I shouldn't say shocked. I don't know what the exact is, but it was very obvious to me how often people left their hands and fingers exposed on the mat. They weren't even concerned about their fingers. So, if you got in the referee's position, it was never a concern. This person, they assumed no one was going to go for your fingers, let's say. And it was just a real obvious thing from our training. Hey, you've always got to be protecting your hands and fingers and don't leave them out there. But if you're not thinking about it, especially when it's a couple generations removed, I don't know at what point, they obviously the rules changed for that, but it was something they wouldn't even convey to the coaches, wouldn't even convey to a lot of their kids.
Well, I'm going to get onto that because I have a question for Brian, but let me add this to what you just said about you take boxers. Now, let's just say you're a damn good boxer. I don't think anybody with a brain is going to sit there and not respect your abilities, your strikes and, your defense and whatever. But for years, there was the big rivalry of boxer versus wrestler, and majority of times the wrestler won. Let's just say it, whatever. But before we even get to that stage, a wrestler would say, well, this is what I could do to a boxer. And that's how I approach things. Well, this is what I could do to a wrestler. This is what I could do to a jujitsu guy. Because see, we're taking them out of their rule set. The boxer very well may be a much better athlete, let's say, than his wrestling opponent. But the boxer is fighting within a certain set of rules, and because of those rules, he never developed any other attributes. So now the wrestler's skill set is a little more lavish. He has more tools. As long as he knows how to cover up enough to get the guy down, he's at a big advantage. So this is just things, like take what I know, everything that I know, all the knowledge that I have and my abilities. If I'm facing a guy who's standing about 10, 15 feet, 20 feet away with a gun already drawn on me, pointing right at me, I'm at a disadvantage. Okay. I mean, we're not talking level playing field here. And that's what I think everyone who's training has to bear in mind, that if you're training in a sport, the rules of the sport are designed to make it a level playing field. No problem. You just have to know how you're going to do when you're not on a level playing field. Okay. And that could be a big, shock. And I don't want anybody to be shocked, but just be prepared for that.
So
Now, Brian, huh?
Oh, go ahead. Finish your
I was
question.
just going to ask you a question. Were you in Iowa when I met Doug Blubaugh?
Yeah, I
At
was
that
there.
seminar? Yeah, right. That was a seminar where he cranked my finger, broke my finger. Remember when he wanted me to demonstrate being spread out, and how you pull the hand in, and he wanted me to keep my hands wide open because somebody else was demonstrating it, and he wanted to show his way, and yes, Brian, Joe, he grabbed it, pulled it in, aggressively, and it was awesome. It was just a great, his his little entry. Now, for those who don't know who he was the Olympic gold medalist in 1960, and he was a wonderful guy. Was really well known for his front headlock and so on. And he beat the guy, I believe his last name was Habibi, who was considered the world's greatest wrestler at that point. But yeah, I thought you were there. I'm glad that my memory's not that bad.
Sure. So ultimately, the variation you showed in Lost Art of Hooking, where someone's tucked in and you lever out, that was one you came up with, or Doug showed? I remember the finish, obviously, with the compression, but
yeah, with the short arm scissor kind of. Well, it wasn't an arm scissor, but yeah, one of them I did two, but one of them, whatever I did on the Lost Art of Hooking, I gave credit to Doug Blubaugh.
Mhm.
So I don't know if we're talking about the same thing, but Doug's
the entry is what I mean.
The entry, yeah. I think because I mentioned Doug Blubaugh on the Lost Art of Hooking. That's the way I am. I like to give credit where it's due, which
Mhm.
I wish a lot of other people would. There's people out there who made a career just using my stuff and never mentioning me. But yeah, he was just I haven't spoken to him in many years. Just a great guy. We had dinner together there, and just he was just awesome. But there was a wrestler in America named Henry Wittenberg, from New York, who ended up becoming a New York City police officer, and he was, I think, undefeated for years and years. And won gold medals and in the Olympics and stuff. And I don't believe he ever wrestled professionally, but there was back in the era where these guys knew their thing. They were probably very effective.
The Doug Blubaugh technique, I remember, was essentially like, if the guy's got really good biceps, good guns, it's going to work even better, which I always thought to be an interesting. It was a compression against the you basically have the forearm and the bicep meet in this particular
it's
lock.
like a short arm scissor grip.
Yeah.
Without the short arm scissor. It's a hold that I could never demonstrate on Joe because he just it's not possible.
Well, hopefully I'll be in the position you can demonstrate on me, and it'll work. That's what I'm hoping with my weight set.
Yeah, keep hoping.
But and that's really like a huge thing, is like, I thought that was cool because you're using obviously the attributes of somebody against them, but kind of touches on something else, is the idea that I'm sure that Mr. Blueball in his career used that to some variation, not as a finish, but possibly as a transition to something else. And, there are a number of holds, Nelsons, for example, that were at one time, or hammerlocks that were finishes, but they're obviously used for other purposes in a, whether it be a folk style, freestyle setting. And I think that that's something to be mindful of. We can talk about more now, but it's just in general. I mean, seeing kids drill it, or I would say kids or even adults do these moves, I'm like, okay, instead of going lower on the neck, you can go higher on the head for a Nelson. And then all of a sudden
Yeah.
the person's out of, being contorted, and, you can rip them out.
Well, Lou Thez made a comment once about when he would travel the world wrestling, and he would see a guy do a move, not necessarily a submission, but just a move. And he's like, oh, this, you know what? Hey, we got something here. Even if it was the ultimate end was a performance aspect of it. He's like, we could take this back and work with this. We can develop this into something. And that was one of the things, like when I was with Lou, we would share ideas on how I would set something up, or he would set something up, and blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of that to take too. And remember, it's really not how many submissions you know. I mean, it's good to be exposed to submissions. I just did a video on, we're going to talk about that in a second on this. But it's finding what works for you, but ultimately you just have to make sure that you're not very vulnerable, that you're not exposed. And yeah, like if you're wrestling and people are putting you in half Nelsons, but it's down on the base of the neck, you're not going to sweat that because it's not going anywhere. But so you'll get lazy and you'll be like, well, I can get away with this against Joe, let's say, or against Brian, because they don't know what they're doing. Well, you can't allow that kind of lazy training to happen, because ultimately you may get up against somebody that knows what they're doing, and now you're in a world of hurt, all because you were so used to not practicing properly. So Joe wanted me to mention this at the beginning, and we got sidetracked. So I really would appreciate it here if everybody who's listening on YouTube at least can like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you can get updates, because I put out videos about 3 times a week on YouTube, free of charge videos, 5 minutes, so whatever, just on certain subjects. Some of them we cover here, some we don't. And it would really be beneficial if we can get our subscriber base up. And yeah, just go to the YouTube channel, subscribe, and then there's a bell there, click it, and then hit like all or whatever, so you get all these notifications. And I address a lot of questions there. That sometimes I'll get questions during the week, and I'll answer them on these videos. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there. So ring that bell.
And that's huge, Tony, because I mean, obviously I started training with you in 98 and moved to Chicago, and, was able to learn some of your approach. I'm still learning, but, a lot of time it was at the Pink Pony having a beer after work or after their gym sessions, or, going out to lunch or something, just sitting there and talking. And, now there's this type of technology wasn't around then. And so it's a huge thing for anybody out there trying to learn this stuff, that you have an opportunity to really tap into this knowledge and get to know this approach really from the comfort of your own home or on your own phone. So that's a big thing. Take advantage of it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and for me, I've always been the type of guy that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not shortchanging myself. I think I'm good at what I do, but I sometimes get more relaxed when I'm out of the gym, and we're in like a real world environment, and then I can start getting on a roll, and then I can start just going off and ad-libbing, and sometimes, like when you're in a gym, you got to be very, very structured, and that's what, like with the Tri-C program, that's really what I'm pushing. If people could join that, because I can be me, I can film, I can take all the time in the world. Like the other day, I had a review of video, and I made like a 15-minute clip for them, of just like walking, and it's just, here's what it is. Sometimes it's longer even than that. But it's geared to you. And that's what we used to do, Brian. Yeah, we used to go out and hang out, relax, have fun. And then what happens? You see things. You might see 2 people starting to get into it, or you'll see a situation where, oh, that reminds me, Brian, I should tell you, if this ever would happen to you, this is how you should approach it. Because when you're in a gym, it's so doggone antiseptic, isn't it? It's just like, man, you just all of a sudden, at least for me, I feel like I'm in a sense, I'm caged. Okay. Here comes those rules again. Right. Um, and that's like, especially if I'm not talking about like my own place, but like when we were at Triton College and things, I was really handcuffed. I couldn't do a lot of, I had some freedoms, but I didn't have all the freedoms. But at my own place, yeah, I could do my own thing. But yeah, everybody has a chance to learn at their own pace, learn at home. And even if you just choose to sign up for these notifications currently, of ultimately I'm going to probably start selling a weekly or like a monthly subscription thing where I'll make a video here that'll be, X amount of time and upload it, once or twice a month just for the subscribers and talk about things that you can't really just openly discuss on YouTube. Because it's time consuming and boring and nobody wants to hear it. Uh, but even if you just watch these weekly clips, I'm sure you're going to pick up some stuff. Most of it's motivational. A lot of it is mental training because I feel, Brian and Joe, that by far the biggest thing that's missing is the mental approach, the mental aspect. And so many athletes can reach the top, but they reach the top by rote memory, by doing as they're told, by not necessarily becoming critical thinkers, and then also, again, winning within the rules. So I want to teach people to develop their mind, open up their pathway to creativity so they can improvise and develop on their own. And your ability, like yesterday, for example, with the accordion. I listened to this guy. I don't know who he is, had no clue, but listened to the chords. This was a song that I never learned. I mean, I could play. Sentimental Journey is a very simple song, but not with nice jazz chords. But because of my training, because of what Ronnie Moon and Jerry Sigler taught me, I was able to hear the tune or hear to pick out the chords and and create the chords. And now I'm making my own arrangement. So now I don't have to sit here and be in awe of this guy and say, wow, I wish I could do that. Well, I can do it. I mean, I can't play as good as him because I'm out of shape, but so this is how I want everybody that trains with me, to be creative. I want you to be able to tap into this. I can teach you to do that. It's not easy. I mean, like anything else, it takes work, but you're not going to get there unless you train with me because you just can't go to Walmart. You can't go to your local martial arts school, this or that, and get that kind of training. It's always about do as I say, do as I say, do as I say. Um, Sometimes you need a little bit more than that. That's how I believe.
Yeah, there's a term. It's you hear it a lot with like different polyglots on YouTube or people that do a lot of second foreign language training. It's comprehensible input. And it's the idea that hitting that threshold to where, I guess, in trying to absorb a second language, where you start to at least hear enough of it that it starts to resonate with you and you can obviously develop on your skills. And I think that's really applicable here to anybody who's training. If they're training with you and they start trying to learn Cecchine catch can, to eventually their comprehensible input reaches a level to where they could be watching, a college wrestling match and say, oh, here's this move. That could be the submission, or even, things going on in MMA, and just the idea that, but they have to have a certain amount of time with you, via these different channels to really have that knowledge to really work off of. Because that's a big thing, because
It is a big thing. And I want to tap on that a little bit or touch on that. Because of my upbringing, because of where the neighborhood that I was raised in and the things that I've witnessed, okay. Um, I was really improvising before I knew anything about improvising. Okay, before I knew anything about music, even. Let me explain. Because there were no sports, like there was no, televised judo, or there was no catch wrestling or anything like that, no sambo, nothing. Okay, nothing where I was. Um, when I would see street fights, with weapons, guns, whatever, just gangs, that was how I I witnessed. Now, these aren't even the ones that I was involved in. I'm just talking as seeing them. And believe me, they were a weekly thing. There, in a lot of areas of the country were like that. It was very shocking to me because I would get to watch Kung Fu Theater or whatever it was called on the weekends. Now and then they'd have some Chopsaki, show on a movie. And while I was blown away by the martial arts abilities of these actors, I'm like, man, that ain't gonna happen. Okay, that just doesn't. That's not the real world. Okay, it doesn't work like that. So I was taught at a young age, um, even before I took lessons, just taught by the real world, the reality of like, you got to be quick on your feet, man. You got to think this stuff out. Uh, and I mentioned many times that myself or whoever I was with, the kid, we'd get jumped and beat up by adults. Okay, we're talking like I'm in grade school here. Okay, so I'm 10, 11 years old, 9 years old, and these are grown adults. Like we're talking people in their 20s, just whatever. If we had a nickel or pennies, it wouldn't matter, or just to do it, just to. And you quickly learn that falling on compassion isn't going to help. All right, at least it didn't in our case. Okay, um, so when I started to train and learn how to fight, now I had all these techniques, and okay, I could draw on my experience, but it still wasn't enough. And it really wasn't until I learned the theory of jazz improvisation. I could always do a drum solo, but that was more mechanical. The uh, the jazz theory was mathematical. It was science based. It's all numbers. And a light went off, like you mentioned earlier, Brian. A light went off for me, and I'm like, now I see. Now I can create. I can put all my jazz theory of improvising into, because I have all these techniques of fighting. Now I can structure it and build from here. And I mean, it was just amazing the difference that it made, and quickly. Okay, this wasn't something that took me years to develop. It was a matter of weeks.
So a kind of a light went off on a do you remember a specific time or a
Yes,
situation?
yes. If you'd like to hear it, I'll tell you. And it was I was studying jazz accordion. Okay, so I had studied accordion with a phenomenal classical teacher in Cleveland. God rest his soul. His name was Ed Safani. Okay, and the guy was just a monster, very good player. However, I want to play jazz. Okay, excuse me. And Ed was just not a jazz guy. Okay, just that's he wasn't. All right. So anyway, I was already a jobbing musician. I was 21, and I ran into Ronnie Moon. Um, I was playing a gig later that night, and earlier we went to this. Me and the bass player and I went to this bar called the Old Homestead, where they used to have jam sessions. Now I was already playing the accordion for about 3 years, and so in walks this Ronnie Moon guy. I don't know who he is. I never saw him before, and he sets his box down, his accordion. It comes in a case, and while we're looking at the clock on the wall here, we got to get going shortly. The guy that I was with was a man named Frank. We had to leave to go over to the bar that we were playing at on St. Clair Avenue. So just before we were getting ready to leave, we had about another 5 minutes. Ronnie Moon opens up his accordion, puts it on, and I'm very disgruntled by this, by everything. These guys are all terrible musicians in this bar, and I just want to get out of there. He starts doing some runs, and I looked to Frank that I'm with. I said, Frank, let's get the hell out of here. I said, this Schlockmeister's coming in here. I said, this clown doesn't know what he's doing. He's just hitting random notes, and it's sounding good to me. I said, we got to get out of here. So we had to walk past Ronnie because he was set up by the door to come in. And the minute I got like a few steps before the door, he starts breaking into this jazz tune called Polka Dots and Moonbeams, 5-part blocks, unbelievable. And I froze. I'm like, holy shit. So I told him, hey, we're playing at Tom Six on 40th and St. Clair, man. When you're done here, man, come on, sit in with the band and blah, blah, blah. He did. And after the gig, I'm like, I got to study with you. Okay. I have to learn. I got to learn this. So I was 21, and after my third lesson with Ronnie Moon, the light bulb went off. Okay. On how to improvise. And I just started to woodshed, man, because he told me, he said, you, you know how to improvise. I said, what are you talking about? He's like, well, I heard you sing, you're scatting, you're hitting all the right notes in your mind. That kind of jazz, and he's like, well, now it's in your brain. We just have to, and I'll never forget this word he used. He said, we just have to educate your fingers. Okay. He says, get it from your mind to your fingers. Well, that phrase is what changed my fighting ability because it wasn't just my fingers anymore. It was everything. Get it to my body in general. And now I started to see everything I ever learned, boxing oriented, martial arts oriented, catch wrestling oriented. And it's like, it's there. And I had a huge advantage. And that was that my boxing and my wrestling were at I was already skilled, especially at the catch wrestling. I learned everything. I was there. Whereas with the accordion, my fingers, I had to get them in shape. Well, I didn't need to get in shape physically for fighting. I needed to get in shape mentally. So that's how it happened, Brian. When he said we got to educate your fingers, because I was already capable of improvising. And then I ended up learning how to learn the right way, and I was able to teach people how to improvise, like musicians that I played with. Most of them weren't. A lot of times I didn't play jazz gigs. I had to play polkas or country or whatever, and I would talk to them about how to improvise. And then I just started to relate that theory to my fighting, and I tried to pass it along to certain students, not many, but not all, but some. So
On
that's
that
my
note,
story.
so you had obviously had a lot of training, physical training, and probably at a pretty high level at that point. If someone's just starting out in martial arts in general, a new system, I mean, when does the improvisation start for them?
I,
Should it?
very soon, right? Maybe not the very first lesson because obviously you have to have some material to work with. Okay. But you used to hear me complain about people who all they wanted to do was live wrestle, like spar, just have fun, goof around. And some people that would come into the gym had no skills. They didn't know anything. So they're wasting time here. They're just, you know, really reinforcing bad muscle memory. Once you start to have some tools, well, then you can start doing your thing and learning how to put it into a practical application. So I would say after a few lessons, let me give them something to work on, but you can start improvising really on the second lesson if we're dealing with like footwork. Okay. Because when you think about footwork, now from a marketing standpoint, it's like he moves like a ferocious tiger and the king of the jungle. Well, that's all marketing bullshit. The truth of the matter is you want to have that grace and fluidity like a Fred Astaire, like a world-class dancer, like Sylvia Lewis, who I saw yesterday and I'm in love with. And when you start to master your body and learn how to improvise just movement, okay? So like if a guy's rushing at you, this is one of the examples I would say. You're in your stance, a guy's coming at you, you know, what do you do just using movement alone? Not blocking, not hitting, not striking. Just what do you move? How do you move? Most people would, probably want to back up. But once you start learning how to pivot, like move to the side or spin, or, you can start improvising on your footwork. Okay. And create patterns there that make you very difficult to hit. And then we can add more things, head movement and so on. I'm just breaking it down here to bare basics. But I'm a firm believer that when you start telling people, you know, how you can move, how all of us have rhythm. Rhythm is like the word diet. Okay. You can have a good diet, you can have a bad diet. Diet is just the food you consume. We all have rhythm, just some are more, more appropriate than others. Every time anybody walks, their movement is their rhythm. So once you start teaching people how to interrupt that rhythm, how to break that rhythm, how to change that rhythm at will, you are now teaching them the basics of how to improvise. And once that clicks, then you can start improvising with the submissions, with the punches, with the, whatever, all your offensive and even defensive techniques. It's hard for me to explain it, maybe like this, but because I feel like we're under a short time limit. But if I had more time, I could go in more depth and actually give you examples. But you get my point.
It seems like it would take a while, like using either like the analogy from music or language as it pertains to fighting. Like, first I have to learn my ABCs. I'm not going to, and I have to learn my scales or learn how to make a chord, and that could take a while. Most people, especially if I'm a ranked beginner, um, and until I have that confidence in that foundation, it's kind of hard. You don't want to put the cart ahead of the horse though necessarily either, right? So it's kind of a
It's two
I,
different, totally different things. No, you're missing the point. Improvisation is not learning a technique. Okay, it's learning an approach. So let's say you're talking about your ABCs. You know, if I would go A, B, C, D, I just improvise how to pronounce those words out loud. Okay. That's all it is. You take what you have and you learn to just adjust. And mind you, my example wasn't how to improvise a top wrist lock. Mine was how to improvise movement, how to move your footwork. Okay. You should be able to know how to walk before you come to train with me. So that I guess is a prerequisite. But if you're able to move and you have 20, 18, 19, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of experience in walking, I can get you to improvise. It's just like a dance class, okay, in a way. But it's not learning a dance move, okay, where you have to memorize the box step or the cha 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 or the polka or something. It's me tapping into your creativity, right away. There's no harm in that. You've got to tap into somebody's creativity before too long, because you look at classical musicians, they're by the book. They got all the technique in the world and they study hard year after year after year after year after year, but they don't learn to improvise. This is generally speaking. You do have some that branch out and want to learn that, bebop or what have you. And now they have all the technique, but they struggle to get that improvisation. They struggle to get the rhythmic dynamics, and especially if they're trying to play bebop. Um, and many of them, the most successful that make the transition made the transition early in their career. Okay. So I'm looking at getting somebody to learn how to start thinking on their own much quicker. And it starts with just a thought in your mind. If I show you something or explain or tell you, hey, did you hear about what happened in, Las Cruces, New Mexico, and there was a gang fight, research it, start to develop your thought process. That's what I'm talking about, Joe. Not learning techniques, at all. Improvisation is not about learning a technique. It's an approach, I guess you'd say, or a method.
doesn't it cross over to like how and when you can apply those techniques though?
Well,
Obviously.
naturally, well, how and why would you play a C chord, okay, or C11th? Of course, and this is the part of learning. There's so much stuff that this is the thing. There's so much to learn that nobody is teaching. Okay. There's far more than just learning a technique. Anybody can teach you a technique, whether it's good or bad or indifferent. There's a deeper element there. Why? Why am I using this technique? Where? Where do I use this technique? Whom? Who can I use this technique on? You know, what? What time in the fight should I use this technique? You know, how? How do I set it up to get these techniques? These are all part of what has to be taught to people. They absolutely have to know this stuff inside and out, not just from rote, from doing it over and over and over because I or somebody else tells you to. I want them to know everything about this technique, the insides and out. Study physiology, study psychology, learn it all. Yeah, it's hard work. It's going to take time, but I'm not going to sit there and say, okay, you've been with me 3 years. Now let me teach you how to improvise. It's not going to happen, Joe.
Tony, to put it on a meta level, I'm recalling, I think, a previous podcast, and you talked about, from a more street or self-defense aspect. Like there's not literally any way to train all possible scenarios in what would be a street situation under attack or whatever. And I think if you touched a little bit on this is where improvisation comes in, is the idea that you have to know how to adapt to that situation right then and there, because you may not have had an opportunity to drill it in the gym, because ultimately anything can happen out there, obviously, in that real world situation.
And we just saw the world just saw a glaring example of that, 3 weeks ago or so, when, the nation's capital got stormed. That's never happened before. So yes, there's no way anybody can train you for every possible scenario. That's where the improvisation is of critical importance. And let me throw another another wrench into this thing. It's when you're not taught things, when you're taught this technique will work in this situation, I guarantee it. And then you get into that situation and it fails, man, it's like, what a crush. Okay. Forget about physically failing. Mentally, you're let down, and then you start to doubt everything. Okay.
Well, not only that can lead to your demise.
Absolutely.
If you're
You
literally,
can get killed.
you literally physically going down a mental rabbit hole because what you just attempted shakes you up, is jarring basically to your entire value system.
It does. And it reflects on your instructor. It reflects on the style that you're, training. I mean, because I get this from a lot of people, that tell me the style that they were training just let them down. Okay. It's just not good enough for them. There's too many, reasons why it doesn't work in all circumstances and so on. And yeah, I think a lot of it is because, you're just not exposed to the honesty of it. And it's not like the instructor many times is being dishonest. They don't have the experience. Okay. They don't. The majority of them don't have it. Yes, they may have a bunch of competition experience, but when you're looking at real world, thankfully most don't, because I don't want to see people in these self-defense situations if they don't need to be. But yeah, you have to learn to think quick on your feet. And just like our techniques, some people grasp it quicker or better or deeper than others. Not everybody can be the world's best, but you have to try. And, it's sometimes common sense isn't really so common. And I think you have to first of all, point people in the right direction. Like I mentioned, the analogy about learning footwork, point them into, okay, try to move this way. Let's work on your balance. Let's make you not so clumsy. And now that opens up, a whole can of worms. When Ronnie Moon told me that I know how to improvise, I just have to educate my fingers. Well, educating my fingers didn't happen right away. Okay. And that took a long time. And that's the problem now with me. My fingers don't react like my brain wants it to. All right. So the sooner you can start doing that and you see your weaknesses and flaws, the sooner that you can rectify them. Like you take my grip now, especially before my arm injury, my handshake was strong. My grip was really, really good, but I couldn't play worth a damn. My fingers, even though my grip was strong, my fingers didn't move like they should, like a virtuoso musician, right? So that's the same thing here. Your body may be fit. You may be looking good. You may be built like Schwarzenegger or something. But when it comes to improvising, thinking on your feet, can your body react to what your mind is telling you? You probably not. You're going to have to train your body to react to your mental commands. So everything has to be a thought in your mind. It's just, Brian, that. You've been with me long enough to know that. I want you to always think things. Think. Remember, without mentioning names, how certain people will come to the gym. Yeah, I want to learn everything, but I don't need to learn leg locks because I've already studied them. I got those down pat. And a few seconds later, they're on a mat with you and they're getting tapped out. Remember this?
Yes.
Okay. It's with a leg lock. They're getting tapped out with a leg lock. Well, that's the point here. Okay. You've got to open your mind and you've got to, just say, hey, look, I'm a blank slate here. I'm an empty cup, whatever, and I want to develop my mind because, none of us know it all. Some of us know more than others, but I tell people that I train, I may know more about fighting than you, but I'm sure that there's things that in your life that far exceed what I know. So you can learn with me without putting me on some sort of a pedestal, but I think all of us have to humble ourselves enough to know we don't know it all. And just like yesterday with that sentimental journey, I've heard that song since I was a kid because my grandparents were World War II people. That was, but I didn't know it all. I never, not only never heard an arrangement that beautiful, I never even thought that you could play chords that beautiful. Okay. I had an open mind and I immediately said, I'm learning this. And that's how I want people to be when they train with me. Just don't, I don't care what your background was. Just have an open mind. I can make beautiful harmonies for you too. And you can create those harmonies as well. Just got to have that open mind and say, I thought I knew it all, but nope. I like what this dude's talking about. Let me go check it out. I'm
And
done.
I think part of it is you touched on it. Some cases with people, it's already within them. I mean, within themselves. I had my own personal Ronnie Moon moment with you, Tony. I recall I was probably the first year I was at the tool and die shop, and we were chugging down some supplements, some protein shakes or something at that bench, over by the front office where we had all that stuff
Yeah.
lined out. And you had a stack of some different like photocopies for some old, back when like Farmer Burns would do a mail order. I mean, they had that stuff back in the day,
Yeah.
some of these, we were looking through it, and, you were kind of just giving me your take on it. And I remember you said, yeah, he's doing this, this, and this. And he's like, at this point, maybe you should be already seeing other things that could be done right then and there. And I hadn't really been at that point. I hadn't really thought like I could be seeing something else that's outside of this particular photograph or these techniques. And then it was like, okay, I should start seeing it. And from then I started seeing it. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I mean, I do think that just like Ronnie Moon told you, it's already there. You just need to bring it out. And it probably exists with a lot of people. And it's a matter of tapping into it and be willing to bring it to the forefront.
Well, you're an exceptional guy mentally, physically, but like you mentioned on the show when you were on as a guest, you weren't like athletic. I mean, you were thin, and this and that when you first came, and you weren't like you were never a monster, right? You never dominated or beat anybody because of your body. Okay. You were able to succeed because of your brain, because of your mind. And you're very sharp with this stuff. And yeah, I never heard you tell me that story, but yeah, when you look at those old time magazines or books or whatever you want to call it, yeah, there's so many things that, well, just like anything, like you can't put everything that you know in a book or even in a videotape. I complain all the time about there's so many things I wish I would have been able to film when I did the Lost Art of Hooking or the Snap Don't Tap or what have you, but you can't. But yeah, you got to see things. And vision is so important. I don't mean eyesight vision. I mean mental vision. To see beyond the what's right in front of you. And another thing that I teach people is ultimately, now this is more on a physical thing. I mean, improvisation covers everything, but this is more physical. Your chain before you get to that submission should be further and further and further away, okay, from the final point. So, like a quick example, if I'm laying on top of a guy and all of a sudden the guy puts his arm up like this, well, boom, there's your top wrist lock, right? That's pretty simple. Well, the point though is you want to be able to get to that top wrist lock many moves before that. You want to start being able to do things to create that guy to get that arm up, okay? And that's how you can like improvise, okay? In improvisation, like there's changes that you might want to play over the bridge of the song, okay? Uh, so you already know what you're going to, I mean, you have an idea of what you're going to do. You don't know it per se, note for note because you're truly improvising, but there's a lead up to it. And that's what these submissions are all about. You're leading up to getting to the submission. Submission is the bridge, or maybe in this case, more apropos would be the ending, the finale. All right. So you want to set things up ahead of time. Okay. You get further and further away from the chosen finish. One of the things I do, and I think you've seen me do it, both of you guys, is when I'll head scissor somebody from a standing double wrist lock. And they're like, what? But yeah, I already know I'm going to get that arm bar, get you bent down, and then come over step over you and choke you out with my legs. See, that's something when you're at that level that you can pull things off like this, your opponent has no clue where you're coming from. Okay. No idea, because it's just like, to their mind, because of the way they trained, there's no way from here, from standing with this situation happening, that they're going to be choked unconscious with somebody's legs, in like 7 seconds later, you know. Um,
Used to use the term bait and switch, I think, on some of
yeah,
these
it's a
moves,
bait, it's a bait and switch, whatever, but that's the music analogy too. Even the most gifted musicians, take somebody like Oscar Peterson or something, he did not know everything that, let's say Joe Pass, the guitarist that would be playing with him, or whomever, Herb Ellis, regardless. He didn't know everything that the guy was going to do in the solo, but many times you could see musicians just smiling like this, nodding their head, because it's like, man, I didn't see that coming. And these are guys who are virtuosos, yet nobody's cornered the market on the mind. Everyone's mind could be super powerful. And in music, I mean, there's only X amount of notes that you can work with. There's only X amount of chords. It's not limitless, but your mind is limitless. And where you put those notes and how you form chords and when you use them and so on, that's where it becomes limitless. That's why every day somebody's writing a new song somewhere, maybe good, maybe not so good, but somebody's being creative. That's how you have to fight. You have a finite amount of techniques, but you have an infinite way of developing your mind to put these uh, holds or techniques to good use. And that, my friends, is where I feel the martial arts, we'll use the term martial art world, is sadly lacking. There's just not enough of that. There's theories. I have theories of why, but they're just my theories. There's no point in sharing them, but it doesn't matter why. It just matters that it is. Okay. This happens. And it's not limited to one style. It's, uh, you know, a lot of people that I've trained are like that. They're not creative. So I want to tap into that if I can. But they have to stick with it. Hello, Joe. You still awake?
Yeah, I'm still. I was wondering what you thought of my brain. You said Brian has a good brain, but
All right. On that subject, I will say this, and I want to make it perfectly clear. Yeah, Brian, you have a good brain. So the Browns are out. I'm going to watch football today, but
speaking
Browns
of seeing into the future, I don't think anybody didn't see that coming. But go ahead.
yeah. But we're supposedly getting hit with 5 to 8 inches of snow tomorrow. I need to go, there's supposed to be a caretaker here tomorrow early, 8 o'clock. So AM. So I'm going to have to run. I'm the only one she doesn't do the shopping. So I got to go to the store, and maybe I'll stop and get a haircut because, I won't be driving the car, in this weather. I can't leave the house. I can't leave my mom alone. So I'm kind of trapped. I got to do things whenever. So, but for those that are interested in following up on the YouTube channel, where I say I put out about 3 videos at this point a week, Mondays is already in the can. That's ready to be released. Joe should have it, and he will upload it tomorrow morning. So, I really do suggest people, subscribe, hit the bell thing. And, they're not like this. They're not like an hour and a half long, 2 hours long. They're like 5 minutes or so, depending. And, that's cool. Gives me something to do, but it's a time consuming process because I have to figure out what I'm going to say. I have to film it when I can. Then I have to edit it because it's all in 4K. This is high quality, man. I figured, well, why not? And then I got to get it going. So it's like, it takes a while, a 5-minute video may take me like 3 or 4 hours by the time it's all over and done with.
I mean, your makeup alone is probably like a good couple hours, especially with that HD camera. You don't want to scare people away necessarily. So it's a lengthy process.
No, it is, and I'll tell you something, but I'm learning. Okay. I'm learning to improvise. The makeup is coming. That's why I think I'm going to reach out to that Sylvia Lewis because, she's been in Hollywood all those years. Maybe she can give me some tips, and she could help my footwork. She was a classically trained ballerina, and you know, did all this stuff with famous celebrities, and she's got the moves, man.
Well, I'm
think
gonna
that's
take a look at her. I don't know, compare her. Linda Harrison's a high bar. That's all I gotta
Oh
say.
well, this is a different look.
Sorry.
Now Sylvia Lewis is very exotic looking, but she moves. I mean, she's built along the lines of a Julie Newmar, tall, long legs. They're all dancers. But yeah, you may like Linda better just because you're into a certain type of woman. I'm into the more voluptuous, the taller, thinner. Linda was hot though. I mean, she was very attractive. You know that. And of course Raquel Welch and Sophia Loren and Gina Lola Brigida. And
Ava
I always
Gardner.
love talking to you, Tony. We go back in a time warp, pre
Yeah, well, Rita
1970,
Hayworth.
basically.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, well, Rita Hayworth. I mean, there you go. For me, growing up, she was it for me. Okay. I mean, I lived my whole life looking for a redheaded Spanish girl, and it wasn't until I was about 18 when somebody said, Rita dyed her hair. I'm like, oh God, I didn't know that. So yeah, yeah, I can't. But I mean, through the years, I've dated blondes, brunettes, redheads. They're all good. Everybody's has their own beauty. Some really, make an effort to let it shine. And yeah, look this woman up. Go to her website. I think it's sylvialewis.net. I'm not sure. Sylvia Lewis something. You'll find it. And then there's some clips on there. Check the one out where she's singing Chelito Lindo on the Dick Van Dyke Show because it's a classic episode. It really. I won't give it away, but it's not the whole episode. It's just her thing. And then don't ever forget Julie Newmar, man. Don't do it. Julie Newmar. She's into yoga, I believe. Juliet Prowse was into yoga as well. She was another. She passed away many years ago, but she was a very nice dancer. Sid Charisse. Now you got me going on all this. Mitzi Gaynor. I mean, come on. Too young
Might have to
know
do a
all this.
separate podcast episode just on the
Yeah.
best of
Yeah.
1943 to 1970, Tony.
Yeah, well, Hedy Lamarr. I mean, talk about back in the 40s. I mean, she was also an inventor. She was very, very knowledgeable. And Joe mentioned Ava Gardner. That was Frank Sinatra's True Love. And not today, we don't have time, but if you guys can remind me, I had a friend who saved Frank Sinatra's life, which would be an interesting story to tell. So maybe for another podcast, we can bring up, hey, Tony, what about that guy that you knew that saved Frank Sinatra's life? That's a pretty cool story.
That is a good teaser. All right,
Yes.
guys, this was a good talk, and I definitely have some old time women to Google now, so got some work to do. So hopefully we can do this again soon. Get Brian back in here. It was
Yeah, it's a
definitely
great time.
talk.
Great time.
Yeah, I rambled a lot today, but good questions. Deep. These aren't like simple answers.
All right, guys, have a good one.
You too.